Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. Tonight we have our very special guest, Shanay Watson-Whittaker. She is our political organizer and strategist, and she's going to break down this complex, developing story, all the details. Roe v. Wade, it has been overturned. I can't even really speak on this issue. But good evening and welcome to the show, Shanay. Thank you for being on with us.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me today. It's pretty devastating what happened last week, but it was expected by many people who support reproductive rights, reproductive justice, and reproductive health.
Yes. And you have been telling me this, and I kept hoping and praying that something was going to come out. And I was like, no, Shanay, we're going to have hope. And you were like, it's not really anything there. So, Shanay, before we get into this, tell us what the impact of Roe v. Wade being overturned is, how quote unquote trigger laws are being impacted in different states, and how we have now gone back to state enacting laws versus this being quote unquote a constitutional amendment. I know that's a term that's been thrown around loosely. It wasn't actually an amendment, but it was a federal case that was given approval by the Supreme Court, which gave women nationwide in all 50 states access to free abortion, or I'm sorry, let me correct myself, to abortion services. I shouldn't say free, but to abortion services without having to ask permission or check with a spouse or having to go before a hospital board, because I've read some stories of what it was like prior to Roe v. Wade being enacted.
Thank you for asking. Again, this is a trying time for many people in America, many women in America that imagined that they would never have to see this day. But it's time for us to reflect and move forward and just get to work. One of the things that we are learning is through Justice Thomas's opinion that Obergefell, which
Mm-hmm.
is gay marriage, Lawrence, which is gay relationships, and Griswold, which is contraceptive care, they're all being asked to be revisited. And that is detrimental. I think people are finally waking up to understanding who are these people that are on the Supreme Court. Justice Coney Barrett, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Kavanaugh stated that they were relying on precedent. And even Justice Alito, they said that Roe was precedent; it was already decided, and yet that started decisis. And yet they actually turned reverse what they said. So they basically lied in front of the Senate when they were going through their confirmation hearings, and we are finally realizing who they finally are and who they've turned out to be, and we are in trouble. So you talk about those trigger laws. There are states out there that have trigger laws, including Michigan. Fortunately, we have the governor who decided to take a preemptive strike against that and Planned Parenthood advocates in Michigan to stop and have an injunction. So that injunction means that abortion is still active and legal here in Michigan. But we do have this 1931 law, and that law basically criminalizes providers and people who provide abortions. So that would include the abortion pill, that would include the actual surgery. But people don't realize that most abortions in America, they're done by pill. So that's the Plan B pill. That's the early stages.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're facing right now. And going back to a time where back alley abortions were commonplace and women actually died or become infertile because of that, that's what we're facing right now. And I also want to just stress that and the people who are going to be impacted
Mm-hmm.
directly. That would be poor women. That would be women of color, specifically black women, and there's also rural women. There, we have 83 counties in Michigan, and overwhelmingly, most of the counties don't have access to reproductive care.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem here in Michigan. And even with the injunction in place, and Dana Nessel, our attorney general, basically stating that she's not going to fight against it because the Planned Parenthood lawsuit is against her office, you still have Western Michigan prosecutors who want to push forward and prosecute people under that 1931 law. And then you also have the Michigan legislature who wants to challenge that injunction and want to push that forward. So that's what we're up against here in Michigan. In the South, that's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
There's states like Oklahoma, Alabama, Missouri that have laws in place, direct laws in place that basically say at the moment of fertilization. So a woman does not have a choice in any way, shape, or form, and even in instances of incest and rape. So we are facing a tough time right now. In states like Michigan, we do have the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot initiative, where groups like mine and community groups from all across the state came together to push forward a ballot initiative that recognizes the importance of reproductive rights, that is inclusive and all encompassing, and we think the most proactive measure in the country.
Okay. Thank you for that, Shanay. You just gave us a lot. So I'm going to try to work through some of the things that you gave us. I want to talk about, and I just lost my thought. Okay. So I want to go back to, you talked about the pill. So there's an abortion pill. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's called the Plan B pill.
Yes, that is.
And you said the majority of pregnancies that are ended or terminated are through the pill. So I just learned that because I was not knowledgeable about that. And in, I believe it's South Dakota, the governor is trying to move or trying to take away telehealth, where the doctors will prescribe it. And I know that there are either 3 or 4 specific pills that are on the market that are for that. And I'm not going to even try to pronounce them because I'll butcher the names. But one is MISI something. And they said these particular drugs are very effective at terminating pregnancy. And I'm assuming at a certain rate. You also mentioned incest and rape. And oftentimes abortion advocates will always say, or pro-choice advocates will always say, you know, if a woman is violated in the most inhumane way, where she is raped in a pregnancy, it is the end result of that. A woman, the question becomes, should the woman have the right to decide, or is the right of the unborn fetus trumping, excuse me for using that word, the mother? Then we have incest, where we have families where an uncle may rape a 12-year-old or something like that. But I think what we also don't talk about is that for those of us, and Shanay, you and I have both had children, and we know that things can go wrong at any moment. And so you can be pregnant and something could happen to the placenta where it detaches. That will require an abortion because the baby will literally die within you. And you can, and even if that child, so that's called a miscarriage. So even if that child dies, they still have to go in and take out that dead tissue out of your body. And I learned that those procedures are called abortions. Correct. And so even if it's a placental, it could be an ectopic pregnancy, which are in your fallopian tubes, which a baby cannot live in that. So that's a pregnancy that has to be terminated. There are genetic abnormalities where, and I believe Down syndrome was one at one point in time, I guess early in our history, where people didn't really understand Down syndrome. But there are certain birth defects where if the heart isn't formed completely or able to function and they can't fix it, I guess after the baby's out by doing heart surgery, or the lungs don't develop or any of those things, those are measures that traditionally doctors have said, this is a pregnancy that's not viable. That's always a term that I've heard whenever someone has told me about it. The pregnancy is not viable. We have to terminate. So those would also go under that guise of abortion. Shanay, is there any conversation from, and I know, and I've heard from people who've said, well, elected officials just sort of thought about this, or the jurists thought about this in a vacuum. We just want to get rid of abortion, but we didn't think about all these caveats that go into that. What would you say to someone who says, but the life of the unborn is what's important?
I think that it's about body autonomy. It's about that pregnant person or pregnant woman of what she or what they want to do with their bodies. I think that politicians should stay out of it and it should be left up to the individual. Listen, a majority of Americans support access to reproductive care, and that would include abortion. And right now, that's been thrown up in the air. And we have, and I talked about life before Roe, and you did as well, and the back alley abortions and then the maternal health rate, especially amongst African American women. Uh, People's lives are at risk, and you have in some states that you actually have to prove that you had a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
And in Texas, you have the reporting law, which is in effect, and you have places like Oklahoma and Missouri as well that are fighting these that are having these kind of laws in place that basically police women's bodies, and that's a problem. I you know I see people talk about this from the other side. I really I have nothing to say about that. My focus is making sure that women have the right to make a decision about their bodies, and government stays out of it. Politicians stay out of it. They have their personal agenda. They're not home every day making those decisions about their body. A majority of women who make these decisions understand the gravity of it. It's so like heart wrenching. This is not an easy subject to talk about. I've had an abortion myself, and it was hard to come to that conclusion to decide to terminate my pregnancy. I've even had miscarriage, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So understanding that procedure, and how would I feel if I'm in Texas and I miscarry and somebody just doesn't believe me and I have to prove that I actually miscarried to have that service? And you don't even know if doctors will perform that surgery on you
Mm-hmm.
if you miscarry or you have an ectopic pregnancy. You know, your fallopian tubes could burst. You'd have to have somebody actually believe you. And the way we are dealing with medical racism right now, black women are not believed as much as white women.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk about that too. And what does that mean for black women? What does that mean for rural women who don't have access to that care? And you know, when you have a miscarriage, it can happen slow or it can happen fast. You know, and you need that medical attention right away. So if you're a rural woman and you're trying to get to a doctor, and you have to go miles away and counties over to get that medical help, what does that mean for you? And what if the doctor says, well, you know, this law is in effect, so I can be prosecuted, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to perform that surgery on you? What does that look like? What does that mean for the average American woman? I know there's a large percentage of they say 1 out of 4 women in America have had an abortion,
Mm-hmm.
and many of them are parents already. So that's the economic conversation that people would have to have as well. That's another burden. We are already dealing with inflation. We're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with all stagnation. We're dealing with all sorts of discourse, negative discourse in this country right now. And this is just upended everybody's lives and what it means in the future. And again, I can say that folks like me and other my partners here in Michigan, we were like, nah, we weren't going to wait for the Supreme Court to make that decision. We were going to be proactive about this, and that's why we have this ballot initiative called Reproductive Freedom for All.
Thank you for that, Shanay. So I want to circle back around, but I want to go to my next question. We're going to come back to contraception, gay relationships, and same sex marriage. So the case that was put before the Supreme Court that was set to overturn Roe v. Wade was Dobbs versus Jackson. Shanay, break down to us what essentially was the nugget or nuggets that helped to put us on this course of action.
Well, the state of Mississippi had passed a 15-week abortion ban, and there is one clinic in the state of Mississippi, and that's in the city of Jackson, the capital. So the Jackson's Women Health Organization sued the state of Mississippi, and that eventually led up to the Supreme Court case. And in the arguments of the state of Mississippi, they basically said, "Do you?" They were asked, "Do you want to overturn Roe?" And they basically said yes, and that was
Mm,
the plan. And this has been in effect. This procedure has been in effect for quite some time. The other side that are anti-choice, they knew that they can work the courts to get to this point, and they have done that successfully. So what it did do, and the impact of it was overturning Roe. And then you have states that are like safe haven states, the coastal states like California's and New York, and California now is going to have a ballot initiative on
mm-hmm.
abortion access and reproductive freedom, modeling some of the work that we're doing out here in Michigan. I'm going to take credit for we're going to that. And also, Vermont has a ballot amendment protecting reproductive rights, but it does not say abortion in the language. But you have those coastal states. And then you have the southern states, and you have states like Michigan that are here. We have one Midwestern state that has access to abortion services, and that's Illinois. So you have Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. Folks have to travel to Illinois just to get that reproductive care. So right now you have clinics that are backlogged, and then you have those abortion restrictions when it comes to time. So with that 15-week abortion ban, other states have decided to pass 6-week abortion bans. And remember, you get your period regular periods for most people every 4 weeks. So you don't know you might not know until you've passed 4 weeks of pregnancy.
Exactly.
And if you're past 6 weeks of pregnancy, there you can't have access to that choice. So we have all of these other states in the central and southeastern United States that have just basically abandoned outright. And although Louisiana has an abortion trigger law, fortunately a judge had an injunction there as well. But you have these other states like Texas, you have the states like Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, where it's a large African American population there that will suffer because of that. And it's unfortunate, and I encourage people to donate to abortion fund services in those areas so people can have resources to travel to states like Illinois, states like New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, and states like California for access for that care, and New Mexico too.
I heard there was a doctor, I forget where he was. It may have been Texas, but they were moving their practice to New Mexico simply because they were afraid of being prosecuted. And I know President Biden, a couple of days ago, it might have been on Friday, he came out and he announced that he did not want people to be prosecuted if they were traveling the highways. And I know that some states have already said, well, if you cross through our state and we catch you, we're going to prosecute you. And so for everyone that's saying, oh, no, that wouldn't happen. You and I had talked about this earlier. There was a woman who was pregnant in Texas, went to Mexico, bought the Plan B pill. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct. Bought the Plan B pill. I guess she had some side effects, went to the hospital in Texas when she returned home, and someone reported her as having an abortion. And I know that got her into some trouble. I don't know if she was able to get herself out of that or if she was prosecuted or what happened. There was another case that I just read about recently. I believe it was in the 70s or 80s, but it was a Native woman. She was of indigenous population who happened to be an addict. And she was one of the women that was prosecuted because she did drugs, but she had an addiction, and no one thought about, this woman is addicted. She's taking this drug because this is what her body requires. And I think that people forget when you become pregnant that if you have a condition, whether it's addiction, whether it's mental, whether it's alcoholism, cancer, any of those things can affect your pregnancy.
Yes.
And so it is a travesty that we do not take those things into consideration.
And I'll add this, a majority of women that are prosecuted when it comes to abortion or miscarriages or anything to do with their body are women of color. They're 52% of the prosecutions. And out of that women of color, out of that 52%, 59% are Black women. So that's what we're dealing with as well. I know the other day there was a rally.
Yes.
Right. And one of the speakers said, thank you for saving white life. So they basically revealed themselves of what they wanted to do. The face of prosecution will be obviously women of color. History shows that anytime there is some kind of crisis, women of color, people of color are targeted directly to make them the face of whatever event is occurring or phenomenon that's occurring at that time. So we know that women of color are targeted. In Oklahoma, there was a person that was arrested in Oklahoma for that, a Native person. And you did mention Houston. It was a Latina who went down to Mexico, and she came back in Harris County, and it was a nurse who turned her in. a nurse.
Wow.
You think of HIPAA violations. You're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to
Mm-hmm.
protect the patient, and yet this person turned her in to something that she had a right to do,
Mm-hmm.
to terminate her pregnancy. So this is where we're headed. Women of color, people of color will be prosecuted because of this. We know how the system works. It wasn't designed for people of color, and again, we will be the fall guys for somebody else's religious fanaticism and religious theory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Christian. I'm Christian. I'm saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost filled, fire baptized. But at the same time, I believe in a woman's right to do what she wants to with her body, and a person's right to do with their body. That is
Mm-hmm.
up to the individual. We believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think this decision hampers that for most American people and most American families.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you on that. You know, it's interesting because we listen to everyone say, oh, if you don't abort your baby, we'll adopt your child. But we know statistically in our nation, across the nation, children of color are usually the ones that are left behind in our foster care system. When we look at foster care, I don't care what state it is that you look at, you will always find children of color are usually the last ones to be adopted. They are the unwanted children. And these are the children that usually end up in the prison to pipeline or in the prison pipeline system, where they end up getting in trouble because there is no family structure, there is no guidance, there is no morality given to them in the traditional quote unquote American model, where we say, oh, well, you have a mother and a father and you have a family, and all these people are supposed to teach you values, and you're supposed to go to a place of worship and learn how to be a good citizen. But if you're in foster care and you're not adopted, nor can you successfully be placed in a foster home. And I've met many people who've been in foster care who will tell you they've gone through a minimum of 50 homes where they go for a day or two, maybe a couple weeks, and then they're sent back out with typically no explanation. And they will just say it wasn't a good fit. Why isn't it a good fit? We'll never know. However, when people say that, I find it interesting that all of a sudden there's this new ad campaign with all these lovely couples saying we will adopt your children, but yet again, as you said, Shanay, they revealed themselves because all the couples that we see are white.
And then we had that rally this past
Yes.
weekend.
Mm-hmm. And when I heard that, my
Yes.
mouth dropped open. I was like, they said the quiet part out loud, and everyone clapped, and I thought, this is exactly what we've always thought it was. In 2016, and I'm going off script right now, in 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, we all said this. We said doom and gloom. Remember, what was it, the first Christmas? And I can't think of what her name is, his wife. She had decorated the White House. Remember, everybody was like, this is the Handmaid's Tale. And people were like, what are you talking about? I said, y'all not understand. They're trying to tell you that that's what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And if you guys aren't watching the January 6th committee, I've just gone way off. If you're not watching the January 6th committee, you need to be. Go back and watch Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. It was intriguing, fascinating, and frightening at the same time to hear that the things that we actually thought were happening, it's way worse than what we actually thought. Yes. All right, I digress. I want to go back to same-sex marriage, gay relationships, and contraception. A lot of people, Shanay, and I'm gonna start at the end and work backwards. A lot of people will say that this abortion ban is a war on women because now we're talking about access to contraception. Now, contraception was not the reason that all women went into the workplace, but it made it easier for them to do so because you can be able to plan your families, as you said, have your autonomy for your body, make the decisions that you would like to make. I also always point out to people that birth control has other applications outside of birth control. Many women, including myself, have fibroids. I had 2 sons. A fibroid grew with each of my sons, so to the point that when every time we had to have an ultrasound, the fibroid was looking like, not that it was a baby, but it was right next to the child. And the concern was, is the fibroid taking anything from my son?
Yes.
And I've had fibroids all my life. I've had very heavy menstrual cycles. I've never been regular. I've always been irregular, but there was some regularity to that. And I know most people won't understand it, but you start to figure out the nonsense where you're like,
Yes.
okay, it's coming. I feel
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Right. You start to understand your body, but it's always been heavy. I was never a person who would have a cycle for 3 or 4 days until I went on birth control. That evened out some of those issues for me. Now, there are people that have to have surgery, whether they have to have myomectomies, where they have fibroids taken out, or they have to have a hysterectomy, where they have to have everything taken out, or a partial hysterectomy, where you have your uterus or you don't have your uterus. There are lots of different things, but birth control is typically the first thing that's given to a young woman who is dealing with that issue. They put you on birth control because it helps to regulate your hormones. Talk a little bit about that, Shanay.
Yes, I'm one of those people who, like you, would have heavy periods, so heavy that I just couldn't get out of bed, and I
Yes.
would take birth control pills to help regulate my period.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't, they're just getting to understand what this means. This is a step towards elimination of contraceptives.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Justice Thomas, in his opinion, talked about revisiting
Mm-hmm.
uh, Griswold
Mm-hmm.
v. Connecticut, that talks about birth control. So that's something we all have to think about right now. And people always think of birth control as a women's issue. Men have access to birth control as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also directly impacted by what happens next. There are condoms, yes. That's a
Mm-hmm.
form of contraceptives. That's a
Yes.
birth control.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And now these days, you have all of these other contraceptives. Men may not want a child either. So what do you say? Those folks that have that opinion, they'll say, well, abstain. It doesn't work that way. Nature
Mm-hmm.
does not work that way. People don't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And eliminating contraceptive care does so much harm, more harm than good. And again, there are people with the post PCOS, with ovarian cysts
Mm-hmm.
as well, that depend on these medications. And it's also about quality of life, we talked about just now. It's our quality of life. It's our ability to go to work, to go to school, for our daughters to go to school, for people to engage in everyday activities without feeling stressed and
Mm-hmm.
tired, because
Mm-hmm.
that fatigue is real,
Yes,
and
it
it
is.
will impact your performance at work, and it puts you at risk for a whole lot of other conditions like anemia as well. So people aren't thinking about those benefits, as well as what it means economically for families across the United States, and what it means for people like my daughters. My daughters are ages 25, 23, 22, 22. Yeah, it's just about that. Now 20, 24, and 25, 24, 23, and 23. So
Mm-hmm.
we have all of, and I'm thinking about my two sons who are 22.
Mm-hmm.
I can't keep up sometimes. But what do I say to them?
Mm-hmm.
They have less rights than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're in a world that they don't have bodily autonomy, that is state, with people that don't have relationships with them, not their doctors, but a politician is telling them what to do with their bodies. They're telling them how to when and how to procreate,
Mm-hmm.
according to their theory, their own personal theory, not according to the Constitution and the protections that we have as individuals in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And I just keep saying this, and I'm gonna big up our ballot initiative. I think, again, this is about protecting women, and it's about, like you said, the medical relationship between a woman and her doctor, that has
Mm-hmm.
to be protected. If a
Mm-hmm.
woman's life is at risk for giving birth, that woman's life matters as
Mm-hmm.
well. If a if a, a if a person needs that care right away, they shouldn't have to travel to 2 or 3 states over to receive that medical care.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians should stay out of our business.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians do not belong in my daughter's home. They don't belong in my home. I have grandkids now. Now they live in a world with no right to autonomy. That is
Mm-hmm.
scary.
Mm-hmm.
Scary. The way we're back to square one with 1973, and then talking about gay rights.
Mm-hmm.
There, we have LGBTQIA folks in my family. I am afraid for them.
Mm-hmm.
I am afraid what this means for them, that their relationships are invalidated, that their love, their commitment to marriage is invalidated because of Justice Thomas's opinion and what this means. That case, Obergefell and Lawrence, were argued under the same premises as Roe and birth control as well as Roe. So that's the 14th Amendment. That's also privacy laws, too.
Mm-hmm.
Due process and privacy, that's what's at stake now. And they will be challenged by one of the southern states. They'll bring it up to the Supreme Court. And then what happens next to
Mm-hmm.
all of those millions of families that have gay parents, that have, gay relationships and gay marriage? What does that mean? Their wills, last living wills and living testaments. Go back to the AIDS crisis of the 80s, how people were living with their partners. They didn't have marriage back then,
Mm-hmm.
and their partners would pass away, and then they were like left out of the blue. Their relationships, it was like it never existed, and people could step in and make decisions for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the families and the couples that were split up. They were living together, and they were split up because one of the partners had the house in their name, and that person passed away, and their partner did not have access to any kind of legal recourse.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that time, even my own uncle, when he passed away of AIDS, he was living with a partner, and his
Mm-hmm.
partner didn't have, his partner passed away as well from AIDS, but they didn't have any kind of legal recourse. That's
Mm-hmm.
horrible. And you've been
Mm-hmm.
with somebody for 25, 30, 40
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're at right now. And that's what's at stake. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I felt like a canary in a coal mine when I spoke to people earlier this year and even last year about what's at stake. And people were like, oh, I don't see the correlation. And then when Justice Thomas released that opinion, everybody's like, oh my God, my marriage is at stake. My life is
Mm-hmm.
at stake. What
Mm-hmm.
does that mean? Is Loving versus Virginia, that
Yes.
directly impacts Clarence Thomas, is that at stake?
Mm-hmm.
Because our civil rights are that at stake right now.
Mm-hmm.
The Voting
Mm-hmm.
Rights Act is
Mm-hmm.
basically,
Got it.
by the
Mm-hmm.
wayside, and now the Environmental Protection Agency as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're up against, and it's really scary that we're going back to a time where Black folks and people of color are second-class citizens just to preserve some ideological belief that is gone by the wayside of our Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Shanay. So I want to share a story, and I have been telling people this story everywhere I go whenever we have this conversation. There was a young lady shared her story on Twitter. She said she was in the third grade. This was pre-Roe. Her mom was pregnant. She came home from school and there was blood all over the floor, and her mother was being rushed to the hospital. Her mother's pregnancy went sideways. Something happened. Her family weren't drug addicts. Her father didn't beat her. Her mother wasn't having an affair or any of those things. Something bad happened. They got to the hospital. The doctors were talking about saving the baby. The baby was in distress. They had to make a choice. The doctors were like, well, we're going to save the baby. And the father said, no, I need you to save my wife. Well, we're going to save the baby because the baby is what's important. I need my wife. I have 3 children here who are already here.
Mm-hmm.
This young girl says that her father, who was everything that she loved, in someone, he was her hero. He was a proud man. He worked hard. He took care of their family. They, went to church, all those things. She said that man had to walk into a boardroom with his 3 children, kneel on the floor with tears in his eyes, wailing and pleading and begging this room of men, only men, there was not a woman in sight, only male doctors, to save his wife, to let the baby go. He said, I need my wife. I do not want to be a widow. I cannot take care of these children. I need my wife. And I read that story on Twitter and I thought, Wow. And I believe this was in 1971. And when she was sharing this, I thought, wow, she remembered that. And she was sharing it. She said, we're not going back to that time again. She said, can't. She said, you don't understand what that felt like. She said, and then when I went home, I had to help my siblings and my dad clean the blood up off the floor. I thought, wow, you're a baby, and had to experience all of this and had to see this as a woman, you know, not that she was a woman then, but as a woman now, had to understand that her father had to go to bat. I want to go back to something else that you said. You talked about medical racism. I always use this case because it's a profound case to me. Serena Williams. Serena Williams, most recognizable person on the planet, elite sports star, all kind of ads, had a baby, has a history of blood clots, knows that she has a history of blood clots. I guess you take medicine or whatever you have to do. Had her child, told the doctors, I don't feel right. I don't feel well. Something's wrong. You need to check. Oh, no. You're fine. You're fine. No, I don't feel well. Oh, no. Just, rest or whatever. She said her white husband had to stand up for her because the doctors weren't believing her. Here is one of the richest Black women in the world, not Michigan, not the United States, the world. And she cannot get the respect given and the understanding and compassion in the hospital when you've just given birth to be able to say something's wrong. I need you to check this out. It wasn't until her very white husband said something. Everything you said, Shanay, is absolutely true. And we are going backwards. I have talked to people. There was a couple that I met, two ladies who lived together. One was going through cancer and she thought she was dying. And one of the things that she said, her family doesn't like me. And if she dies, I just need her to have this house because this is our house. And I was like, wow, I would never thought about it, until it impacts you, you don't understand it. And even though it really didn't impact me, I got a chance to see it and have a conversation. For people that are struggling, Shanay, and I know we've talked a lot, for those that are struggling who want to fight for reproductive access, for those who want to make sure that same-sex marriage can stay, for those that want to fight for the ability to love who you want to love, for those who want to fight for access to contraception, what do we do?
One, you support abortion funds. There are abortion funds throughout the country. Specifically, I would say the abortion funds in the southeastern United States to focus on. Two, I would say support ballot initiatives like ours in Michigan. It's called mireproductivefreedom.org. You can sign up to join us. You can sign up to volunteer. You can sign up and donate. We need help. We are up against a tough coalition of opposition that are against all that you stated: reproductive rights, gay marriage, loving, committed gay relationships, and contraceptive care. That's what we're up against, and we need people's help. And I also encourage people to vote in November. If you are in the United States, vote. We need people who are pro-choice, who are pro-gay marriage, who are pro-love, who are pro-peace in our democracy. So I would encourage people to vote as well, to support mireproductivefreedom.org, to vote in November, and to support abortion funds throughout the country as well.
Thank you, Shanay, for coming on the Kim B. Davis Show and breaking down the Roe v. Wade being overturned to us. Tell us where that we can find that petition. Tell us how we can find you, and tell us what else you have coming up.
Yes, you can find that petition actually locations to sign a petition at myreproductivefreedom.org. You can find me on Twitter at LaFemme_Negrita. And again, you could just go to the website and Google abortion funds and donate. We need the support. We really do. And we need you to vote in November. That's what we need. Essentially, that's what we need to push back against those folks who are against progressivism and moving forward in love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, guys, please get out and vote, visit the website, get involved. Remember, we are the ones that are in control. We are the electors of these officials. And when they don't do their jobs correctly the way that we want to, we can fire them and elect someone else. So let's use our power wisely. Thank you, Shanay, for being on the Kim B. Davis Show. I know you'll be back again next month because this topic is developing day by day. There's new things and there may be some other things coming up. So we look forward to hearing from you then.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Kim B. Davis Show. You know, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, everywhere on social media, and it's Kimberly Batchelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Batchelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and Wisdom. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you'll join us on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.